These talks look like a breakthrough. Russia, Ukraine, and the US are finally at the same table. But expectations are deliberately low, and that's not accidental. If peace is really the goal, why does one country seem to control the pace, the pressure, and the outcome? This isn't just Ukraine versus Russia anymore. It's about why the US holds the real leverage, and what it's choosing to do with it. For the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, negotiators from Russia, Ukraine, and the United States are holding trilateral talks. The meetings are taking place in Abu Dhabi and are expected to last up to 2 days. This format is new. Past negotiations were indirect or strictly bilateral. Despite the new setup, officials say the core disagreements remain unresolved. U.S. President Donald Trump has publicly pushed for a peace deal. He has said both sides would be stupid if they failed to agree. In the lead-up to these talks, his envoys have been engaged in shuttle diplomacy. Ukraine is participating for 2 stated reasons. First, it wants an end to the war. Second, it needs to maintain U.S. political, intelligence, and military support. Last year, the U.S. briefly suspended intelligence sharing and military aid to Ukraine. That suspension was later reversed, but Ukrainian officials have cited it as a warning. President Volodymyr Zelensky says recent talks with Trump in Davos were really positive. He's expressed hope for increased U.S. air defense support. Zelensky described the Abu Dhabi meetings as a step, but stopped short of calling them a positive one. He said Ukraine is close to a peace framework, but that the final issues are the hardest. The biggest unresolved issue, according to Zelensky, is territorial control in eastern Ukraine, especially the Donbass. Russia has demanded that Ukraine hand over large parts of the Donbass region. Ukraine has rejected that demand. Another issue under discussion is future U.S. military support if Russia invades again, what Ukraine calls security guarantees. Zelensky claims a U.S.-Ukraine deal on guarantees exists, but no details have been made public. Verify Russia has not publicly agreed to any such guarantees. Meanwhile, Russia continues to strike Ukrainian civilian and energy infrastructure. Kyiv's mayor has warned residents that the situation is extremely difficult and could worsen during the winter. This is analysis, not fact. Most reporting assumes these talks are mainly about peace. Structurally, they're about leverage. The U.S. enters these talks with tools that neither Ukraine nor Russia has. It controls military aid. It controls intelligence sharing. It has influence over sanctions enforcement, and it shapes NATO's future posture. Ukraine is not negotiating from full autonomy. It's negotiating under conditional support. One interpretation is that the U.S. is using peace talks as leverage management. By keeping expectations low, Washington avoids political blame if talks fail, while maintaining pressure on both sides. Ukraine has strong incentives to stay cooperative. It can't afford another pause in aid. Russia also has incentives to show up. Talks signal legitimacy and buy time, even without real concessions. In this reading, the talks are less about resolution and more about controlling escalation. There's another interpretation. Trump's personal political incentives may matter as much as strategy. He has publicly promised a deal. But delivering peace requires trade-offs, territory, security guarantees, or long-term commitments. Those come with political costs at home. Low expectations protect Trump from looking weak if talks stall. They also let him show effort without taking ownership of the outcome. There are also questions the mainstream script doesn't really ask. How credible are U.S. security guarantees under an administration that has questioned NATO commitments? Can Ukraine really keep saying no if aid becomes explicitly conditional? And does Russia see these talks as a diplomatic track or as cover while escalating attacks? The Greenland comments matter here. They weaken the idea of territorial sovereignty, the same principle used to justify support for Ukraine. That contradiction is rarely addressed directly in Western media. In the short term, These talks reduce diplomatic pressure on all sides. They create the appearance of progress without binding commitments. And Ukraine remains dependent on U.S. goodwill during an active war. So who benefits right now? The U.S. benefits most. It keeps maximum flexibility. Russia benefits too. It gains time and diplomatic signaling. Ukraine benefits the least. It gets continued engagement but no firm guarantees. The long-term risks are bigger. If territorial disputes remain unresolved, any deal risks becoming a frozen conflict. That locks Ukraine into permanent insecurity, high reconstruction costs, and long-term military dependence. If U.S. guarantees stay vague, future deterrence weakens. Russia has already signaled that if talks fail, it will pursue its aims on the battlefield. At an institutional level, this reinforces a broader shift. Peace processes led by great powers, smaller states negotiating under dependency, security guarantees tied to political loyalty, not binding treaties. That model doesn't just affect Europe, it shapes how future conflicts could be managed elsewhere. What exactly is in the U.S.-Ukraine security deal? Are these guarantees written, conditional, or purely political? Will military aid be formally linked to negotiation behavior? Watch closely for changes in U.S. aid language after these talks. And does Russia escalate attacks during or after negotiations? That will help show whether the talks are strategic or mostly cosmetic. And finally, the core question. Is the U.S. trying to end this war or manage it on its own terms? That question matters far beyond Ukraine.